I was driving when the hospital called and said emergency admission. My hands shook and my heart raced as I rushed through traffic. I am a mother who learned to fear silence. My son had been tired lately and no one listened. The hospital lights felt cold and endless. I ran past the front desk calling his name. A nurse stopped me with worried eyes. She pulled me close and told me to hide and wait. I did not understand, but I trusted her. She led me to a door near the ICU. I stood behind it barely breathing. Voices came from the room sharp and calm. I recognized my daughter-in-law voice. She spoke to a man who sounded like a lawyer. They talked about papers and money. They talked about how sickness helps plans move fast. My stomach turned as I listened. They were not talking about saving my son. They were talking about finishing things. They were talking about what I own. I felt old and small and angry. The nurse returned and squeezed my hand. She said she had been watching for weeks. She said something was wrong with the four. She said records did not match. She said there were recordings. She said my son trusted the wrong person. I felt my knees weaken, but I stayed. The nurse showed me a bag wrapped tight. She said it was proof. She said the poison was slow. She said today was meant to be the end. I prayed without words. I watched as the door opened again. The lawyer left smiling. My daughter-in-law fixed her hair. She looked powerful and sure. I felt a fire wake inside me. I was not useless. I was not done. The nurse nodded and stepped away. She said the trap was ready. I waited for the right moment. I thought of my son as a boy. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered his laugh. I promised him I would not fail. The hallway clock moved slow. Sirens echoed far away. This was only the beginning. I stayed hidden while my heart pounded like it wanted to escape my chest, and every sound in the hallway felt louder than before. The nurse told me to stay calm and watch carefully. She said people like her always believe they have already won, and that makes them careless. I saw my daughter-in-law walk past the door smiling at staff, pretending to be the perfect wife, and I realized how well she wore her mask. I remembered all the times she called me old and weak. All the times she said I was a burden. I remembered how she pushed me away from my son. Little by little the nurse came back and quietly told me the four had been replaced, and my son was now safe for the moment. She said doctors believed his sudden sickness did not make sense. She said the poison was designed to look natural. I felt rage rise inside me, but I stayed silent. We watched together as my daughter-in-law made phone calls, whispering near the window. She spoke about assets and houses and accounts. She spoke like my son was already gone. I felt sick hearing her plan my future without me. The nurse showed me recordings on her phone, and I heard everything clearly. The truth was painful, but it made me strong. I realized this was no longer about fear. This was about protecting my child and stopping evil. I looked through the glass and saw my son breathing slowly, machines around him keeping him alive. I pressed my hand to the door and promised again that I would fight no matter my age, no matter how they saw me. The nurse said the police were on their way, but we needed patience. She said timing mattered, and I nodded, knowing this battle required silence before the storm. Time moved in strange ways as we waited, and every minute felt heavy on my chest. The nurse told me more details in a low voice. She said my daughter-in-law had been asking unusual questions for weeks about medications and dosages. She said the 4 bags were changed when no one was watching. She said a cleaner noticed a strange smell, but was ignored. I felt my trust in people break, but my focus grew sharper. I watched my daughter-in-law return to the room and sit beside my son, holding his hand and crying softly for anyone who could see, and I realized how dangerous false tears could be. She whispered words of love while planning his end, and that thought filled me with cold anger. The nurse asked if I was ready to speak when the moment came, and I said yes without hesitation, because silence had already taken too much from me. I remembered every sacrifice I made for my son. Every night I stayed awake, every job I worked, every dream I gave up, and I knew I would not lose him to greed. The nurse said the lawyer would return soon to finalize documents, and that was when everything would change. I felt fear, but it no longer controlled me. I was waiting, not hiding anymore. I was preparing, and I knew this part of my life would define me forever. The hallway filled with quiet tension as footsteps echoed closer and closer, and the nurse signaled me to stay still while security moved into position. She explained that the hospital administration had been alerted, and that internal cameras had captured enough movement to support the recordings. I felt a strange calm settle over me, like the storm inside had finally chosen a direction. My daughter-in-law returned again, this time with confidence in her walk and a folder in her hand. She believed the end was near, and that belief made her careless. She spoke loudly on the phone about freedom and starting fresh, as if my son was already a memory. I watched her through the glass and felt no fear, only clarity. The nurse told me the doctor would soon announce a change in condition, and that reaction would reveal everything we needed. Moments later the doctor entered and spoke softly, telling her my son's condition had suddenly worsened. I saw her eyes change. For just a second, not grief, not shock, but relief. She turned away to hide her smile, and in that moment I knew there was no doubt left. The nurse looked at me and nodded, and I understood the trap was tightening, and there would be no escape for her lies now. When the doctor left the room, the air felt heavy, and my daughter-in-law began pacing back and forth like someone waiting for a finish line. She checked her phone again and again, sending messages with shaking hands, not from fear, but from impatience. I could feel her counting time in her head, measuring how close she was to winning everything she believed belonged to her. The nurse stood beside me, explaining more in whispers. She said the poison was mixed carefully over days, so it would weaken organs slowly and look like natural failure. She said my son trusted his wife completely and never questioned the 4 changes. Hearing that broke something inside me, but it also hardened my heart. The nurse told me the police needed one more clear action to move in, something undeniable, something she would do when she believed no one was watching. We waited, and soon my daughter-in-law slipped into the supply area, pretending to cry into her phone. I watched as she reached for another 4 bag, the wrong one, the marked one the nurse had replaced earlier. That moment felt like time freezing. My breath stopped, my hands clenched, and I knew this was the proof they needed. Security quietly blocked exits, cameras recorded everything, and when she turned around she froze, seeing officers standing there. Her face drained of color, her voice failed, her mask cracked, and for the first time she looked small and afraid, not powerful, not smart, just caught and exposed. And I stepped forward then, not as a weak old woman, but as a mother who had survived the worst fear imaginable and refused to lose her child. The moment I stepped forward, her eyes locked on mine, and all the lies she ever told seemed to fall away. She tried to speak, but no sound came out, and the folder slipped from her hands onto the floor, papers scattered like her broken plan. The police asked her to explain what she was doing, and she looked around for help that never came. The nurse handed over the recordings and the poison 4, and the officers listened carefully while she began to shake. She tried to cry and claim love, but her words felt empty even to her own ears. I stood there listening to everything and felt years of being ignored lift from my shoulders. My son was moved quickly to another room, protected and watched closely by doctors who now understood the truth. The nurse told me his body was responding, and that he would live. Hearing that felt like breathing again after drowning. The police placed cuffs on my daughter-in-law, and she screamed that this was a misunderstanding, that I had ruined her life, but her voice sounded weak and distant, like someone already losing everything. She was led away, and the hallway fell quiet. For the first time that day I sat down slowly, my legs finally giving up, and the nurse held my hand, telling me I was strong, and that courage does not belong to the young alone. I watched through the glass as my son slept peacefully, and for the first time in weeks hope felt real and warm and close again. The hours after her arrest felt unreal, as if the world had slowed down to let me catch my breath. Doctors came in and out, explaining how close we had come to losing him, and how the poison would have shut his organs down within days if it had continued. Hearing that made my chest ache, but it also filled me with gratitude that we arrived in time. I stayed beside my son, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, and remembering every moment of his life, from his first cry to his first step. The nurse returned, often checking machines and checking on me too. She told me many cases like this never get caught because families are afraid to speak or too tired to fight, and I realized how important it was that I listened to my instincts and trusted a stranger who cared enough to risk her job to do what was right. My daughter-in-law name spread quickly through the hospital, and staff whispered about how calm and convincing she had been and how close she came to getting away with everything. The police asked me questions late into the night, and I answered all of them without fear because the truth finally had a voice. My son began to wake slowly, confused but alive, and when he squeezed my hand weakly I felt stronger than I had in years. I told him everything gently and watched pain and disbelief cross his face, but he believed me, and that trust healed something deep inside me. I understood then that this story was not just about betrayal, but about survival, and about a mother who refused to disappear quietly. Days passed inside the hospital walls, and each day felt like a lifetime as my son slowly returned to himself, and doctors explained how the poison had weakened him in ways that would take time to heal. I stayed close, never leaving his side, because fear still lived inside me, quietly reminding me how close we came to losing everything. The police returned with more questions and more details, and they told me my daughter-in-law had planned everything carefully. Months in advance she had studied illnesses, she had researched inheritance laws, she had spoken to the lawyer about timing and control, and hearing this did not shock me anymore because my heart already knew the truth. My son listened in silence, his face filled with pain and guilt because he trusted the wrong person, and because he felt he failed to protect me too. I told him none of this was his fault, and that love should never be punished with blame. The nurse who saved us visited one last time before her shift changed, and I thanked her with tears in my eyes because without her courage this story would have ended very differently. She smiled and said, sometimes doing the right thing means standing against evil, even when it wears a friendly face. News reached extended family, and people who once ignored me now spoke kindly, calling me brave, calling me strong, and I realized how quickly opinions change when truth stands tall. My son began physical therapy, slowly learning to regain strength, and each small step felt like a victory against death, against greed, against betrayal, and I knew the hardest part was not behind us yet, but we were no longer alone and no longer afraid. The court days began quietly but carried heavy weight as my son grew stronger, and I found myself standing in places I never imagined, speaking to lawyers and officers with a calm voice that surprised even me. I listened as evidence was presented, recordings played, 4 bags tested, timelines exposed, and every piece confirmed what the nurse and I already knew. My daughter-in-law sat there, no longer confident, no longer smiling. She avoided my eyes because she knew the truth had stripped her power away. My son testified with honesty, describing trust, love, and confusion, and his words moved everyone in the room. I felt proud, not just because he survived, but because he faced betrayal without becoming bitter. The judge listened carefully, and when the decision was spoken, it felt like a door closing on a long, dark chapter. Justice was served, and the greed that nearly destroyed our family was named and punished. After court, people approached me, calling me strong, calling me an inspiration, and I realized how strange life is. How the woman once dismissed as old and useless now stood as the reason. Truth survived. My son and I returned home, slowly rebuilding routines, sharing meals, sharing quiet moments, and healing together. I looked around the house she once planned to take and felt peace knowing it remained filled with honesty and love. I understood then that age does not weaken a mother's instinct, and that courage does not fade with time, it grows sharper when tested. And this journey changed me forever. Not into someone angry, but into someone unbreakable. Finally, the day came when my son returned home fully awake and smiling. The first morning felt like a miracle. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, I watched him move around the house, carefully testing his strength, and I remembered every prayer, every sleepless night, every heartbeat that had carried me here. I felt tears, but they were not just sadness, they were relief, gratitude, and triumph. Together we unpacked simple things, small joys, the smell of breakfast, coffee on the table, sunlight through the window, and I realized life was beautiful even after betrayal, even after danger. My daughter-in-law faced consequences that echoed far beyond our family, her plans destroyed and her lies exposed to everyone who mattered. My son and I could finally breathe freely without shadows lurking around corners. I held his hand and told him how proud I was, how brave he had been, how love and truth had won over greed and cruelty. He looked at me with wide eyes filled with understanding and whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I smiled, feeling my strength and his courage merge into one unbreakable bond that nothing could touch. We began to rebuild our lives together, slowly, carefully, surrounding ourselves with people who truly cared. And every night I thanked the universe for the nurse who guided me, for the inner voice that refused to be silenced, for the love that survived even the darkest plans. And I understood finally that being called old and useless never mattered. What mattered was heart, instinct, and courage. And now those things had saved my son, saved me, and made us both stronger than ever before. The story ended not with fear, but with triumph, with hope, with life continuing, and with the certainty that truth always finds a way to protect those who never stop fighting.